Welcome to XO, where science meets heart at the kitchen table. I'm your host, Davey. In each episode, I narrate B-side tracks curated around a single theme: the why behind the ingredients, the swaps that make it better, and the stories that have been simmering for generations. No interviews, no guests, just me and you. This is EP 13, the technique stack. Before we get into the kitchen, the crust that stopped being intimidating the moment I understood their logic, the pan that builds a sauce nobody planned, the vegetable that got interesting the second I stopped slicing it, the tools that earn their space by showing up for every meal, I need to tell you what this episode is really about. It's not about kitchen skills. It's about understanding why techniques work. Because once you have the why, the how stops being intimidating. Because once you understand that choux, short crust, and pie crust each have a different logic, and that choosing between them is really just choosing a structure, the decision paralysis disappears. Once you know what the fond is and why it makes everything that follows taste better, one-pan cooking stops being lazy and starts being the most intentional way to build a meal. Once you crack a cucumber with the flat of a knife and watch the dressing saturate every crevice instead of sliding off a smooth surface, you realize technique changes flavor even before the heat turns on. And once you clear the drawer down to the 5 tools you actually reach for, the kitchen stops being a logistical problem and starts being somewhere you want to be. 4 tracks, 1 stack. Let's build it. Track 1. I have crust issues. Not making them. My issue is knowing which one to make. And for years, that paralysis meant I avoided baking crusts almost entirely. I'd see a recipe that called for pâte à choux and close the tab. Too French. Too technical. Too many ways to fail. The problem wasn't skill. It was the belief that pastry had a steep entrance fee. Then I actually made choux for the first time and stood in my kitchen feeling genuinely robbed. There's no rolling, no chilling, no keep the butter cold anxiety that plagues every pie crust tutorial on the internet. You cook it on the stovetop. You melt butter in water, dump in flour, stir it into a ball, then beat in eggs one at a time until the dough is smooth and glossy and pulls cleanly from the sides of the pan. That's it. The whole technique. Something I'd avoided for a decade took 20 minutes and produced a dough that pipes into eclairs, cream puffs, and French crullers. The ridged, hollow, completely air-filled rings that make people think you bought them from a bakery. The dough didn't care that I was nervous. It just needed fat, water, flour, and eggs in the right sequence. That's the thing I've learned about crust. Each one has a logic. And once you understand the logic, the technique stops being intimidating and starts being inevitable. Short crust, the workhorse of savory baking, is called short because of its high fat-to-flour ratio. That fat ratio is what makes it crumbly and tender instead of chewy. You're not building gluten. You're coating the flour particles in fat so they can't link up. Rub cold butter into flour until it looks like damp sand. Add just enough water to bring it together, and you have a crust that can hold a quiche without getting soggy, a tart without shattering when you cut it. It forgives re-rolling in a way American pie crust doesn't. American pie crust, the flaky, layered, holiday table standard, is different because you want distinct chunks of cold butter, creating steam pockets when they hit the oven. That's what makes the layers. You're not rubbing the butter in, you're leaving it in visible pieces. Keep it cold, work it fast, don't overhandle it. And you get flaky layers that shatter at the fork. The reputation for difficulty comes from overworking it, which develops too much gluten and turns the crust tough. It's not a temperamental dough, it's just a cold one. 3 crusts, 3 logics. Choux when you want to produce something ethereal and impressive with no rolling involved. Short crust, when you need a container sturdy enough to hold something wet. Flaky pie crust, when you want visible layers and a shatter at the bite. The decision paralysis disappears the moment you understand what each one is actually for. You're not choosing a recipe. You're choosing a structure. A crust is a structure. And the most interesting cooking happens when you understand that every pan is a structure too, and the sequence you use it in is the whole technique. Track 2. One pan. I used to think one-pan cooking was a shortcut, a hack for nights when you're too tired to deal with the sink. The internet sells it that way. Easy cleanup. Like the only reason to cook in one pan is laziness. But something kept happening that I couldn't explain. The one-pan meals tasted better. Not just easier. Better. More layered. More connected. Like every bite had a backstory. It took me a while to figure out why. When you sear chicken in a pan, the meat leaves something behind. Those dark caramelized bits stuck to the bottom, the brown proteins, the rendered fat, the starchy residue. That's called the fond. Most people see it and think the pan is burnt. It's not burnt. It's concentrated flavor. When you cook your shallots and garlic in that same pan, they don't just soften. They absorb everything the chicken left behind. They pick up the rendered fat. They soak in the brown proteins. By the time your vegetables go in, they're cooking in a history of everything that came before them. In a multi-pan meal, the chicken flavor stays in the chicken pan. The vegetable flavor stays in the vegetable pan. They meet for the first time on the plate. Strangers at a dinner party. In one pan, they've been in conversation the entire time. You can't just dump everything in at once. I tried. It doesn't work. The pan gets crowded, the temperature drops, and instead of searing, you're steaming. Everything turns gray and soft. No browning. No depth. One pan cooking has a sequence, and the sequence is the whole point. Protein goes first. It needs the hottest pan and the most space to build that sear. Take it out. Set it aside. Aromatics go next. Shallots, garlic, whatever you're working with, they swim in the rendered fat and start pulling up the fond. Vegetables follow. They soften in the fat and the aromatics, picking up layers as they go. Then the liquid, a splash of broth, wine, or even water. The moment it hits that hot pan, it lifts everything off the bottom. All that concentrated flavor dissolves into the liquid and becomes a sauce. You didn't plan a sauce. The pan made one for you. This is the part that got me. The sauce in a one-pan meal is unrepeatable. It's built from whatever happened in that specific pan, on that specific night, with whatever you had on hand. The liquid picks up the starch from the vegetables, the gelatin from the protein, the fat from the aromatics. It emulsifies into something that couldn't exist any other way. You're not following a sauce recipe. You're just reporting what happened in the pan. A squeeze of lemon at the end, that's all it needs. The acid lifts everything. It brightens the fat, sharpens the fond, and turns a heavy pan into something that feels alive. When you cook in separate pans, you're building ingredients in isolation. Each one develops its own flavor, but they never actually meet until the plate. It's an introduction. When you cook in one pan, you're building integration. Every ingredient carries a ghost of the one before it. The vegetables taste a little like the chicken. The sauce tastes like everything. Nothing is separate. Nothing is starting from scratch. That's not a shortcut. That's the whole philosophy of cooking in a single sentence. Let the flavors build on each other. One rule: if the sizzle stops, the pan is too crowded. Pull something out. Give it space. You need contact between the food and the metal. That's where the browning happens, and the browning is where the flavor lives. One pan, one sequence, everything connected. In one pan, every ingredient builds on the one before it. The sequence is the technique, And sometimes the most powerful thing a technique can do is change the surface of the ingredient before the heat even starts. Track 3. Smash it. The cucumber has a branding problem. It's the thing you put on your eyes at a spa, the soggy slice floating in a pitcher of water at a hotel lobby, the filler vegetable on a cheap salad that nobody ordered for the cucumber. We've treated it like background noise for so long that most people genuinely believe there's nothing interesting about it. Crunchy water. That's the reputation. I thought the same thing until I smashed one with the flat side of a knife, and everything changed. A clean cucumber slice is polite, the knife passes through, the surface is smooth, and whatever dressing you put on it slides right off. It's a closed door. A smashed cucumber is chaos, in the best way. When you crack the skin open with a heavy knife or the back of a cleaver, the flesh splits into jagged, uneven pieces. Rough edges, torn surfaces, pockets and crevices everywhere. Those crevices are the point. Every rough edge is a place for dressing to grab hold. Rice vinegar, sesame oil, chili crisp, garlic. It all pools into the cracks and stays there. Each bite is fully saturated instead of just coated on the surface. The first time I made a smashed cucumber salad, I ate the entire bowl standing at the counter. It wasn't even dinner. It was supposed to be a side dish for later. There was no later. A good cucumber is tense. When you bite into one that's truly fresh, there's a snap. Almost like biting into something pressurized. That's because it basically is. The cells are filled to the point of bursting with water. That internal pressure is what gives you the crunch. A soft cucumber has lost that pressure. The cells have started to collapse. It bends instead of snapping. If your cucumber bends, it's done. Don't put it in a salad. It'll just make everything else feel tired too. The snap matters. It's the difference between a cucumber that contributes something and one that's just taking up space. I'd never cooked a cucumber until I started paying attention to how they handle them across Asia. In Chinese cooking especially, cucumbers go into the wok. That sounded wrong to me. You cook a cucumber? It's 95% water. Wouldn't it just dissolve? It doesn't. If you cut thick chunks and hit them with fast, high heat, the outside sears while the inside stays crisp and juicy. You get this smoky, slightly charred exterior with a cool, snappy center, hot and cold in the same bite. I stir-fried cucumber chunks with garlic, chili flake, and a splash of soy sauce one night when I had nothing else in the fridge. It was supposed to be a desperation move. It became a regular rotation dish. The cucumber held up. It didn't just survive the heat. It got more interesting because of it. Cucumbers are almost entirely water, which means they're always looking to trade. Salt them and they release moisture. Soak them in vinegar and they absorb it. Put them next to a dressing that's too strong, too much chili, too much acid, and they'll pull that intensity inward and redistribute it as something more balanced. That's why cucumbers are the king of the pickle. They're not just sitting in brine. They're exchanging their water for flavor at a molecular level. It's also why they work as a balance tool on a plate. If everything else is loud, heavy spices, rich fat, sharp acid, the cucumber is the thing that brings the temperature down. Not by being boring, but by absorbing the excess and turning it into something refreshing. Smash 3 or 4 Persian cucumbers with the flat side of a knife. Break them into rough pieces. Salt them generously, and let them sit in a colander for about 10 minutes. They'll weep out some water, which concentrates the flavor and keeps the salad from getting soupy. Toss them with rice vinegar, sesame oil, a crushed clove of garlic, and as much chili crisp as you can handle. That's it. 5 minutes. No cooking required. It's crunchy, spicy, savory, and cold. It goes next to everything. It goes on top of rice. It goes with grilled chicken, roasted salmon, noodles, or absolutely nothing else at all. The cucumber didn't change. I just stopped treating it like a garnish. The technique changes the ingredient. And the most lasting technique isn't something you do to the food. It's knowing which tools make every other technique possible. Track 4, the minimalist kitchen. When I moved into a new home last year, I found myself in a home goods store so often it felt like I should have been on the payroll. I kept thinking I didn't have the right tools, so I bought piece after piece: a spiralizer, a specialty baking pan, a ceramic garlic roaster I used exactly once. Nice things, sure, but as the weeks went on, I kept reaching for the same 5 items, over and over. The same cast iron skillet, the same sheet pan, the same chef's knife, the same wooden spoon, the same Dutch oven. Everything else was just taking up drawer space. That's when it clicked. The best kitchen isn't the one with the most stuff. It's the one where you can find what you need without thinking about it. The tools that have earned their place by showing up for every single meal. The chef's knife is the only truly non-negotiable. A good 8-inch knife does everything. Dices vegetables, slices meat, smashes garlic, breaks down a chicken. I've watched people own 30 specialized tools and still struggle because they never invested in one knife that actually felt good in their hand. The knife is the whole story. The cast iron skillet is the second anchor. It holds heat better than anything, which means when you add cold vegetables to a screaming hot surface, the temperature doesn't crash. The sear continues. The browning continues. It goes from stovetop to oven without hesitation, and it gets better with every use. The seasoning builds, the release improves, the history of every meal before this one is baked into the surface. A sheet pan and a Dutch oven complete the core for most of what I actually cook. The sheet pan is the most underrated tool in the kitchen. Vegetables, proteins, anything that needs high dry heat. The sheet pan handles all of it. A wire rack on top turns it into a roasting setup that circulates air underneath. The Dutch oven does everything slow: soups, braises, stocks, beans, heavy enough to hold heat for hours, sealed tight enough to turn cheap ingredients into something extraordinary over time. Beyond those 4, everything else is optional. A wooden spoon, a flat whisk, a cutting board large enough that you're not chasing onions off the edge, a mixing bowl that goes from prep to table without looking out of place. That's it. That's the minimalist kitchen. It's not about owning less for the sake of it. It's about removing the friction between the idea of a meal and the making of it. When every tool in your kitchen earns its space, cooking stops being a logistical problem and starts being something you can drop into without a plan. Start small. Buy one good thing instead of 5 mediocre ones. The tool you reach for without thinking, that's the one worth spending money on. Most home kitchens are over-equipped, but under-optimized. You don't need a separate gadget for every task. You just need a thoughtful set of tools that feel good to use and last long enough to tell a few stories. That's EP13, the Technique Stack. 4 tracks, 4 techniques that change what's possible. The 3 crusts that stopped being intimidating the moment I understood each one as a structure. Shoe for the ethereal, short for the sturdy, pie for the shatter. The one pan that builds integration instead of isolation, where the fond is the memory and the sauce is unrepeatable. The cucumber that went from garnish to the best thing in the bowl the moment I stopped slicing and started smashing. And the kitchen that got better when I cleared it down to the 5 tools I actually reach for. Technique isn't a barrier. It's the shortcut you didn't know you were looking for. Here's to health, happiness, and a remix that's uniquely yours. Thank you for spending time with me. Food feeds the body. Music feeds the soul. Remixology is where they collide. Download the Remixology app. New music and recipes drop every Friday.